Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. A few lines from Julius Caesar and Shakespeare. Many will tell you how Dan Lutz died. I would like to tell you about how Dan Lutz lived. Before I'd ever met Dan, Dan was a master woodsman. He had studied and learned the skills honed in countless hours outdoors. He had learned to love and feel comfortable in the outdoors. He was a man of many, many talents, many, many skills. He had been a professional bass fisherman, went through all the tournaments for a time. He had been someone that raced drag bikes, motorcycle riding. Him and his wife had gone from Ohio to Florida on a motorcycle before. He had gone all over the place as that. He built cars. He loved to build race cars and race engines. He had become a diesel mechanic and was considered one of the best, and had service contracts for many of the big names up there in Ohio, running his own service company. Dan was a master trapper. He had studied the animal and studied the environment and studied the cycles to where he was making $40,000 or $50,000 a year as a trapper on the side of working full time and building other things. A friend of mine once used the term a Renaissance man, a man who is versed in all the old knowledge and just seems to know and have a passion for learning. Well, Dan Lutz was a Renaissance man for sure. As well as all the above, he was also a bridge inspector and a road inspector and a snowplow person. He had multiple jobs that he did for the state of Ohio. And it was in one of those jobs that Dan got severely injured. He got onto a piece of equipment, an end loader that scoops up sand and puts it into a dump truck. And he was going to reload his snowplow with sand. And apparently got in, and when he put it in gear, the throttle stuck and it took off running backwards at maximum speed until it hit a wall. And when it did, it bent Dan backwards. Oh, big, huge Dan. It broke his back on the seat. And that really put a hurt to Dan, because he'd always been so outgoing, so dynamic, someone that was just constantly in motion about something. And that forced him to sit. He couldn't move. He had to just sit there with that big old brace they put you in for your back. Well, his good friend Randy Smith, who is the master leather worker from StitchGear.com. Randy checked in on him every day, and they were extremely good friends. And he kept, trying to keep his spirits up. And what Dan could do was sit there and watch YouTube videos, and apparently that's how he found me. He had found my videos, and I probably had like 300 or 400 videos at that time, and he watched every one of them. You could say Dan was a little bit obsessive about knowledge. Once he found a topic, he would get such a taste for it that nothing else filled his moments until he had a working knowledge of it. I am positive that you'd never want to play chess against Dan Lutz. I mean, I never did. I don't even know if he could, but I just am positive that if you sat down at a chessboard, Dan Lutz is going to kick your tail, because he's probably studied that game beyond master level. You couldn't bring up something that Dan didn't have working knowledge of, and that's just so incredibly rare today. Well, how I met Dan, I had decided to go up to Dave Canterbury's Pathfinder gathering, and I want to say it was 2016, 2017, something like that. And so me and my friend rode up there, and we just got there. You know, guys, you got to understand, my channel wasn't that big. I was maybe 15,000, 20,000 at the most followers, and 15, I think. And I was, you know, I'm up here to be a fan. I want to see like Dave Canterbury, which I met many years ago and something else. But I wanted to meet, you know, Jason Hunt, Jamie Burley, all these people that I'd heard about, and I've watched their videos and stuff. So when I got up there and people started going, "Hey, you're Blackie Thomas," and I really didn't know how to act with that, guys. I mean, I had been recognized a couple times before, you know, like at a gun show or something, but never like this. It just seemed like everybody that walked by went, "Hey, you're Blackie Thomas," you know. And it was kind of a little unnerving. And I'll get to why I'm bringing that up in a little bit. So I had stepped over at the edge of the commons area, and I'm looking at all the traders and vendors. And I'm standing there just looking around, trying to take it all in. And while I'm doing it, the sun is behind me and my shadow is on the ground. Suddenly there was a shadow. I mean, it's what caught my attention. I looked down, there was this shadow come out that dwarfed me. Now, I consider myself fairly well versed in being a woodsman and being outdoors and being situational aware, but I never heard him come up. When I spun around and looked, I mean, he was right there. And I'm looking about the middle of his chest. He's 6'8", I'm 5'8". You know, he's a foot taller than me. And actually, I'm right at 5'10". But, and I had to do like that and look up at him and said, "Hey, you're Blackie Thomas. You got that William Collins knife on you? Can I take a look at it?" And I went, "Sure," and brought out the knife, and he looked at it and said, "You know, I just don't see this knife. I just don't see this knife. I don't understand the design of it, just doesn't make sense to me. I don't see how. And this Coke bottle handle, I don't see how." I went, "Well," and we went to talking. High speed like we do. This is the grip, that's the grip, how's this, this is for doing this, that's for doing that. And over the next 10 or 15 minutes, we stood there talking. And as we're doing this, somebody was walking by, and Dan said, "Hold a minute." And he pulled his phone out and he handed it to the guy and said, take a picture with me and this knife. Not me and Blackie, me and this knife. And we're standing side and side, and just as the guy went to take the picture, Dan said something funny just to make me laugh. And so I'm going to put up now the very first picture of me and Dan Lutz. We've known each other 15 minutes. We've just met. But look at Dan, how calm and cool and reserved he is, and I'm looking like a mule about to bray. Because of what he just said has cracked me up. And he did that intentionally to make me crack up. In that little bit of time, he knew what he could say and make me crack up. So he caught me in mid-crack up. He loved that picture. Well, after we had talked about the handle and the design and the shape and how this or that, and he said, "I'm sorry, my back's been broke. I got to sit down. You know, you want to walk over here and keep talking?" I said, "Yeah." And we walked over a little ways, and there was Randy Smith's set up for StitchGear.com, and Dan had this big old rendezvous type, big old board chair that he could sit down and keep his back straight. And we went to talk, and that's where I met Randy. And we talked for 30 more minutes on it, and then he threw out the next two. "I just don't see the use for kukri. I know you like that kukri, but I don't see the use for kukri." Really. So I went back to camp. I got my kukri. I went and got a piece of firewood, and I come back and I got in front of him, because he's got to sit there, and got on the ground in front of him, and we had a 45-minute class on what a kukri could do. And by the end of that class, he could see the use of a kukri. Moreover, the people that were walking around thought it was some sort of demonstration. People started stopping and just listening to us going back and forth, and thought it was some sort of impromptu demonstration. It wasn't supposed to be. But it ended up being 10, 20 people standing there watching this as we did this. Well, in hindsight, I look back, knowing Dan. Now let's look what Dan's done. One, he's got to look at that new knife. Two, he got to talk to somebody he'd seen on YouTube, me. Three, he's drugged me back to his buddy Randy's tent, to his display. Four, I'm now gathering a crowd around Randy's stuff and Randy selling stuff. Tell me you want to play chess with Dan Lutz. He had said all that in his mind. There was just one more step, and he'd pulled all that together. So now he's helping his friend Randy. He's getting to see what he wants. He's getting to talk to me. He's getting to work about this knife and about a kukri. And he's got a crowd gathered up for Randy. And all that was broke back. Oh boy. We started a friendship right there. And that knife I had got was a prototype from William Collins. And it was one of the very first ones of the Woodsman's grind. We're trying to work something out. And this knife William had come up with kind of based on some of my inputs back and forth with him and his knife wizardry. And that one we just simply called the prototype. And it had more of a butcher type tip on it, but it had the Woodsman's grind, but kind of rough. This was an early prototype, guys. And I had promised William I would give him 6 months with that knife of feedback. And just watching Dan hold that knife and use that knife and whittle with that knife, in my mind I heard that little inner voice said, this is where that knife's supposed to go. Dan Lutz is supposed to end up with that knife. So I made a deal with him at that event. I said that I would make sure he ended up with that knife. I'd buy the knife and me and him would work out a deal. But he had to do video on it because we're trying to give feedback to William, right? So you got to do video. And he said, oh no, I don't do anything like that. I said, well, that's the deal. You know, you've got the knowledge, you've got the skill. I want you to demonstrate this for William on a video. And so very reluctantly he agreed to it, and that was the first video that Dan Lutz ever did, was demonstrating how to use that knife. I think he filleted a fish and we sent the video to William, and that's how him and William became friends. Well, once I got home, I'd been home and we'd said, now I told Dan, I said it'd probably be 6 months before I'm done with this knife and we can work it out then, but we shook hands, you know. And he came home and he told Rhonda, his wife, he said he'd got a knife on a handshake. He said, I probably will never see that guy again, but I got a knife on a handshake. Well, I come home and I got a hold of William and I told him, I said, look, I agreed to do this and give you 6 months feedback and I'm going to honor that, but when we're done, I want to get this knife from you. I'll pay for it. And I want to make sure that it ends up with Dan Lutz. And so after I told William who Dan Lutz was, best I knew, and etc., and he said, well, I tell you what, go ahead and keep the knife. Just go ahead and pass it on to him. And I've got from feedback I'd already given him, he'd created another prototype. Well, that prototype is my old original Master Woodsman that you've seen in all my stuff. So this became the prototype for the Master Woodsman and the Blackbirds series. And that prototype that Dan ended up with is what had led to this. This is the refinement of that prototype. So that ended up how I got that knife. Dan and I talked at least once a week for over a year. When I say talk, there'd be times that we'd stay on the phone 6 hours. That's not an exaggeration, guys. People would get whiplash listening to us because Dan and I could talk, and we would start out talking about a knife, and that would morph into hunting, and then that would be what's the best way to do this, and that would flow into that, and just, it was like that. And me and Dan, you know, we really clicked on that. And he just had the ability to see, and most important, trait I could ever point out about my friend Dan Lutz is his ability to learn. You know, he was a gigantic mountain, but he was as gentle as he could be. But when he got mad, he was mad now. There was no doubt Dan was mad, but he could admit he was wrong. You know how rare that is today? And when he was wrong, he'd admit it. He'd go, okay, you were right, I was wrong, I went off the handle. And then we'd drop it and we'd go on. And Dan was that way with everybody. I mean, he knew people from coast to coast and talked to all of them. You just felt in the first 5 minutes of being around Dan that you'd known him your whole life. He never met a stranger, and you were never a stranger to him. You know, he was just somebody that could start talking on any level, be it on technical level with people that was wanting to talk real advanced stuff, metallurgy and stuff like that, or bridge construction, or ballistics. He was one of the master gunsmiths. He built a lot of his own guns, both muzzle loaders and old modern guns. Being a nuisance trapper, he was able to use equipment that most of the average bear can't get, because he had to have it, because he was taking out deer on airports for the state of Ohio. They'd get a herd of deer end up in an airport area, and they had to thin them down because it was dangerous. The deer were getting out there at night, and you're going to have a plane come in the land and have a herd of deer. So he would be brought in to thin them out. So he had special equipment for that. He was one of the best shots I've ever met. Just natural instinctive shooter, and that's the mark of a hunter that's been out there and spent a lot of time. He was bow and arrow, shotgun, rifle, muzzleloader, handgun. He was just one of the greatest woodsmen I've ever had the privilege to meet and be around, and that's saying something from the guys I've been around. High praise, because Dan Lutz was worth that praise. When the hard part when you're doing this and talking about Dan is you don't want to leave out anything, but there's so much. In that 4 years or 5 years of me knowing Dan, it was like 20 years worth of experiences packed in there. You know, when we went to Blade Show, and Dan and I were being barkers for Randy and William, and they ran 100, I believe the number was 180-something thousand people through that event, had bought tickets and come through that event in those 2 or 3 days we were there. And me and Dan both talked ourselves hoarse, completely hoarse. We couldn't make a sound, have to just sit there for a while until our voice came back. There were so many people. And Dan would, you know, the young ladies going by, he'd talk to them, how you doing? The young guys, same way. The old guys going by. Dan could just shift gears on a heartbeat. And he loved kids, loved working with kids. A lady up there in Ohio had contacted him and wanted to teach her children some stuff like flint and steel. And so Dan had gone and worked with them, and he was just so proud of these kids for the effort that they put in, how well they listened to him and stuff like that on how to do it. And Dan was a master of communication. He worked with his people whatever level you needed to get it through to you. He could cuss like a sailor if that's what it took for you to hold on to it, or he could be like the biggest church person you ever seen. If that's what he needed to be, he could change gears like that and be that person. Whatever you needed for this situation, Dan could be it. He was a master woodsman. He was a master trapper. And he was just one of the best people you'd ever want to meet. When we got him into a hammock because of his broke back, and his wonderful wife Rhonda had, whenever I had met him up there at Pathfinder gathering, and then a few months later we'd gone to an event over in Mississippi, And Dan and his wife Rhonda had come down to that, and bless her heart, she's not a woods woman. She loved Dan, would go anywhere with Dan, but you know she likes room service, and she came and she took care of Dan. She helped set up tent and everything else. Of course, had to lay on a pad on the ground because he couldn't get up, and we worked with him. He's still in his brace. But at a couple of events later, we got him in a hammock. And that began a lot more mobility because he got to where he could set up his hammock himself and he could lay down and get in and out of the hammock without being afraid of hurting his back, because that's a big fear once you broke your back, guys, is that if you fell down or something. But Dan didn't let it stop him. He was scared to death of it. He'd tell you in a minute, I'm sitting here trembling like heck, you know, because he's afraid he's going to fall down. But he kept going. You know, he didn't let it stop him. And he wanted to be back out there in the woods. He wanted to get out and share. He came to Frozen Foot events. And he was one of the people that every time we put on an event, there was Dan. You know, and he would go camp to camp. He would talk to people at night around the fires. You know, he was just a wealth of knowledge. And whatever topic you wanted to talk on, Dan was willing to listen, talk, or whatever. And he was as good a listener as he was a talker. And the outpouring of people that now that Dan has passed that have talked to me about how close they were to Dan, you know, how important Dan was in their life is a testament just to how wonderful a person Dan was. Of course, whenever we'd be out and up to, you know, 3 or 4 days on campouts, he'd start getting antsy because he missed his wife. He'd call her every chance he got. She's getting off work, he'd go call her. You know, whatever. He was always in a hurry to get home because she was the one thing he just couldn't live without in his life. And he told me that one cold night around the fire that, you know, if it hadn't been for her, said I'd been in Alaska, I'd have been somewhere out in the middle of whatever, but I can't be there without her. He truly loved that woman. And his daughter, Courtney, he was very proud of her. Independent, fierce, stubborn like her daddy. And he liked that. He liked that she had her own mind. And his stray, as he called it, which was the other daughter, Rebecca, he was proud of all of his people. Really was. His brother, he was always, you know, when he told me about his brother who's a truck driver, getting into leather, how his brother was going to be making this and making that, and they worked together on various projects. Brought him in the conversation with me where me and Dan were working on developing products together, and he'd bring his brother Steve in, or he'd bring whoever. He introduced me to James Bender because him and James Bender had become friends, and Dan had gone and taught a little bit and helped out at his school, and which is Waypoint Survival. The list just goes on of all these people that Dan was in their life and touched their life somehow. I had gotten Dan to doing classes because when we first got together, in a year or two of it, since Dan couldn't work anymore. And I had been talking to him. It was bothering him because, you know, he was on disability and he couldn't do anything. And I said, what do you mean you can't do anything? He said, well, I can't work. I can't be a diesel mechanic. I can't. And I said, in my family we have a saying, those who can do, those who cannot teach. Well, you cannot be a trapper anymore of any great quantity. But you've got 30 to 40 years experience, don't you, Sparky? I bet you that's valuable and somebody wants to hear it. And I don't know, I don't know. Well, we talked him into a class and would great gratitude, I'd like to thank Dave Canterbury for his help in putting that first class on, because he helped us find a venue for the class. And we got Dan's first class, and I said, you get up there and you just talk about it. Bring your stuff out and talk. That was kind of like pulling teeth, because these were secrets to him. You know, you don't talk about how you trap because that's your money. And I said, yeah, but now you're selling that. So do it. He said, I don't know. I think I'm going to get up there and I'll run out of things to say in 30 minutes. I said, well, if that happens, we just let it go with it. Well, me and Mike Denny and a bunch of others went up in support of him. And Trapper Dan and Randy was there. Michael Ilya. We were all there to support Dan. And Dan got up and went to talking about his class. And 6 hours later, he finished. 6-hour class. You know, we've got the footage of that. And he, whenever we pointed it out to him, it was 6 hours. It felt like we just only started talking 10 minutes ago. I said, yeah, you got that much knowledge, brother. He knew things that I had never even thought of. And he'd say, well, when you find a trail and you find the sign of, you see the tracks, and the tracks going two ways, what does that tell you? So it means they're going back and forth. It's a main road. He said, exactly. If they're just going one way, they wandered through here. But if you see tracks going back and forth, that means it's a road, and that's where you want to put a trap, and things like that, and how I do this and how I do that. And just, he got a lot of notoriety. He started putting on these classes for trapping, and a lot of very knowledgeable trappers realized what a gem Dan Lutz was. Dan developed his own knife, which was a skinning knife. And there was going to be a whole series of knives, but he got the skinning knife out. And if it wasn't for the COVID pandemic shutting everything down, he'd probably had much more stuff out. But it shut down production of knives and a lot of other stuff because you couldn't get supplies or whatever. He came to my events that I put on, my little gatherings, and he always camped in this certain place right down there by the water. And this last year, him and his wife came. She actually hammock camped. We were so proud of her, and it turned cold. Well, cold for us. The days were in the high 40s. The nights were in the 40s, I should say, and the days probably got like 52, 53, and it was a cold wind. And so we felt bad, and we kept her all bundled up and everything, and kept big old sleeping bags with her and everything else, trying to keep her warm. And he worried about that every time I saw him. I just worried if she's cold. I said, well, if she's cold here, it's her own fault. She's surrounded by people that you just say I'm cold, we'll pile stuff on you. We'll get a big enough fire going, they'll see it on Mars. But he worried about his people. He really did. Well, when this last time, this year, back in January or February it was, we had been asked to go up and be kind of guests at the Fuel the Fire gathering up in the mountains of Georgia. So me and Dan went to it, and I had been recovering from illness and was still kind of weak. And I told Dan, I don't know, we'll see. He said, oh yeah, come on, we'll take care of you, don't worry about it. And so we got up there, and the place is here, and it's this mountain, and it goes up and away from, think like a stadium with bleachers going away. And Dan picked a place up there and higher up in elevation, pretty good bit, like 200 yards up from the house. And so we got up there and we got all set up, and later that evening we were sitting there talking, and somebody pointed out, so where y'all at? And Dan said, up, da-da-da-da-da. He said, there was a black bear up there earlier today. Y'all are up there where the bear is. And I said, what? And Dan went, cool, middle of the night, Blackie Thomas with a kukri taking on a bear. That's going to be an epic story. And I said, why the heck I got to fight the bear? How about Dan Lutz and bears? All these southern bears are small. You wanted a fair fight, right? You're small. Y'all play. Grizzly come up, I'll take it. That was Dan, you know. And we had a really good time there. Uh, we had my gathering, like I said, where we put Rhonda into a hammock. And we were on the phone every couple of days talking about this, developing that, how we're going to work this out. He had things he was wanting to develop, and we were trying to find sources for those, and, you know. And then this last time, we were going to Georgia Bushcraft, and I didn't know Dan was going. Now, this is the mystery to me, guys, because talking to Dan as much as we do, and we're always talking about what's coming up or whatever, but I didn't know Dan was going to this. The Fuel the Fire group had asked me to come to Georgia Bushcraft to put on a class on a kukri, because they were doing a lot of classes. And it's about a 6-hour drive from me over near Athens, but I said sure, I'd come up and support the group. And it was 2 days before we were leaving is when I found out Dan was going. He'd never mentioned it. You know, and I had mentioned I was going several times, but he had never said he was going. But I thought, oh, cool, you know, I didn't know you were coming to this. And he said, yeah, I'll be down there. So I got up that morning, because it's about a 6-hour drive. I left here about 4:30 in the morning. And after I got on the road, I called Dan with the hands free, and I knew he'd be on the road, and he said, call me, and we'd talk through the sun coming up time period, because that was his worst time for staying awake. And we talked a good deal of that 6 hours. The rest of the time he called and talked to his brother, or Mike Denny, or any of the other family group that we would all talk on the long trips together, just to keep each other awake and alert. And we set up camp, and we put our 2 hammocks about 8 feet apart. And Dan set up his little fender, and we were selling my haversacks and his bags and his knives and several other things. Being right there in the middle of the Fuel the Fire crowd, and it was a great time. I mean, we talked to people from all over the country. And Saturday night, well, Saturday, when Dan put on his class, there was a couple there that drove all the way just about from Missouri. They were as far as you could go that way in Tennessee, where it's up against the Missouri line. And it drove all that way to see Dan. And they told him that. So we didn't come to see Georgia Bushcraft. We came to see you, because they'd followed him on his podcast and on his Thursday night shows that he did live. And Dan sat after the class was over and talked with him for probably another hour. And then that night, as we're calling it quits and heading back to the camp to get in our hammocks and go to bed, he said, I don't know how to deal with that. I mean, people drive all this way to see me. I just don't know how to deal it. And I laughed, because you remember what I said about me going to Ohio when I met Dan? I don't know how to deal with this. I laughed and said, welcome to my world, brother. You know. And he said, well, yeah. And I'm so very grateful that Dan did get some of the recognition he deserved. I mean, that he saw that he was recognized and known, you know. And that made me very proud for Dan. It really did. Well, the next day we got up and broke camp and shared breakfast right quick, and we walked over and looked at my new to me vehicle, and said our tearful goodbyes, and Dan loaded up and took off, and I took off. 20 minutes later, my phone rang, and it was Dan going, you miss me yet? And we talked, I'd say probably 90% of that next 6 hours, me coming home. And whenever I was finally getting home, and he said, okay, well, I'll call my brother now. So he was calling his brother. A day or two went by, and I sent him a text every day, how you doing? And he said he started feeling bad. And then his health went bad, and a couple of days went by, and just getting a 1-word or 2-word reply. And then finally he didn't respond to me, and I got a hold of his brother, and I said, there's a problem. And it was not long after that Dan went in the hospital. I'm so very proud to have known Dan Lutz. And anybody that spent any time with him will tell you that. The stories of Dan Lutz are going to be told around campfires for years to come, because I know I got a pile of stories about Dan Lutz. And Dan, you know, every man dies, but not every man lives. And I can tell you for a fact, Dan Lutz lived. And at one point on one of them cold nights when two old men sitting around a fire talking, because we always expected I'd be the one to go because of my health. We had talked about that. He said, well, when he got to the other side, he wanted to run. When he was a young man, he could run like a deer. He said, now I can't do that. And I said, well, you will be again. And that was the first thing his brother said to me about it. He said, well, now Dan can run. And I'd like Dan said he wanted to go someplace and see Alaska. He wanted to go see Canada. He wanted to see the high mountains of the Rockies. He wanted to go explore them places. And I told him that, well, go explore. That maybe I'll get the chance to go with you and we'll go explore a little bit. So to my brother Dan, I would like to say, if you can hear this, Dan, go ahead and find some place high and pretty. Nice overlook, plenty of firewood and plenty of water, and get a fire going. And I'll see you at sundown. If you would like to contribute to the family to help for final expenses, I'll put the link at the end of this, because many people have asked me about that. I am very privileged to have known Dan Lutz. And I look forward to sharing the fire with him again. Thank you for watching, and I wish you a safe journey.